Hey, hi, how are you? We're back for another one of our read-alongs, so get your copy of Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows, and we'll pick it up from where we left off yesterday. If you remember yesterday, we've just met Mole, a couple of rabbits, and Mole has just met Rat, that's better, and Rat was taking Mole on a little trip along the river in his boat, wasn't he? And he just said, that's the wildwood. Alright, you don't really want to go in there. But over there is the wide world, and you do not want to go there. And then they just backed in, or I can't remember the word they used. They just rode into a backwater. That's what word they used. They just rode into a backwater, and that is where they're going to have their lunch. So that's where we're picking up. About halfway through chapter 1. You ready? Here we go. Leaving the main stream, they now passed into what seemed at first sight like a little landlocked lake. Green turf sloped down on either edge, brown snaky tree roots gleamed below the surface of the quiet water, while ahead of them the silvery shoulder and foamy tumble of the Wear, arm in arm with a restless dripping mill wheel that held up in its turn a grey-gabled mill house, filled the air with a soothing murmur of sound, dull and smothery, yet with little clear voices speaking up cheerfully out of it at intervals. It was so very beautiful that the Mole could only hold up both forepaws and gasp. "Oh my! Oh my! Oh my!" The Rat brought the boat alongside the bank, made her fast, helped the still awkward Mole safely ashore, and swung out the luncheon basket. The Mole begged as a favour to be allowed to unpack it all by himself, and the Rat was very pleased to indulge him, and to sprawl at full length on the grass and rest, while his excited friend shook out the tablecloth and spread it, took out all the mysterious packets one by one, and arranged their contents in due order, still gasping, "Oh my, oh my," at each fresh revelation. When all was ready, the Rat said, "Now, pitch in, old fellow," and the Mole was indeed very glad to obey, for he had started his spring cleaning at a very early hour that morning, as people will do, and had not paused for bite or sup, and he'd been through a very great deal since that distant time, which now seemed so many days ago. "What are you looking at?" said Rat presently, when the edge of their hunger was somewhat dulled and the Mole's eyes were able to wander off the tablecloth a little bit. "I am looking," said the Mole, "at a streak of bubbles that I see travelling along the surface of the water. That is a thing that strikes me as funny." "Bubbles?" "Oh," said the Rat, and chirruped it cheerily in an inviting sort of way. A broad, glistening muzzle showed itself above the edge of the bank, and the Otter hauled himself out and shook the water from his coat. "Greedy beggars," he observed, making for the provender. "Why didn't you invite me, Ratty?" "This was an impromptu affair," explained the Rat. "By the way, my friend, Mr. Mole." "Proud, I'm sure," said the Otter, and the two animals were friends forthwith. "Such a rumpus everywhere," continued the Otter. "All the world seems out on the river today. I come up this backwater to try and get a moment's peace, and then stumble upon you fellows. At least, I beg your pardon, I don't exactly mean that, you know." There was a rustle behind them, proceeding from a hedge wherein last year's leaves still clung thick, and a stripy head with high shoulders behind it peered forth on them. "Oh, come on, old badger!" shouted the Rat. The badger trotted forward a pace or two, then grunted, "Company," and turned his back and disappeared from view. "That's just the sort of fellow he is," observed the disappointed Rat. "Simply hates society. Now we shan't see any more of him today. Well, tell us who's out on the river." Toad's out for one," replied the Otter, "in his brand new wager boat. New togs, new everything." The two animals looked at each other and laughed. "Once it was nothing but sailing," said the Rat. Then he tired of that and took to punting. Nothing would please him but to punt all day and every day, and a nice mess he made of it. Last year it was houseboating, and we all had to go and stay with him in his houseboat and pretend that we liked it. He was going to spend the rest of his life in a houseboat. It's all the same. Whatever he takes up, he gets tired of it and starts on something fresh. Such a good fellow, too, remarked the otter reflectively, but no stability, especially in a boat. From where they sat, they could get a glimpse of the main stream across the island that separated them, and just then a wager boat flashed into view. The rower, a short, stout figure, splashing badly and rolling a good deal, but working his hardest. The rat stood up and hailed him, but Toad, for it was he, shook his head and settled sternly back to his work. He'll be out of that boat in a minute if he rolls like that, said the rat, sitting down again. Of course he will, chuckled the otter. Did I ever tell you that good story about Toad and the lockkeeper? It happened this way. Toad... An errant mayfly swerved unsteadily athwart the current in the intoxicated fashion affected by young bloods of mayflies seeing life. A swirl of water and the mayfly was visible no more. Neither was the otter. The mole looked down. The voice was still in his ears, but the turf whereon he had sprawled was clearly vacant. Not an otter to be seen as far as the distant horizon, but again there was a streak of bubbles on the surface of the river. The rat hummed a tune, and the mole recollected that animal etiquette forbade any sort of comment on the sudden disappearance of one's friends at any moment, for any reason or no reason whatever. Well, well, said the rat, I suppose we ought to be moving. I wonder which of us had better pack the luncheon basket. He didn't speak as if he was frightfully eager for the treat. Oh, please let me, said the mole, so of course the rat let him. Packing the basket was not quite such pleasant work as unpacking the basket. Never is. But the mole was bent on enjoying everything, and although just when he'd got the basket packed and strapped up tightly, he saw a plate staring up at him from the grass, and when the job had been done again, the rat pointed out a fork which anybody ought to have seen, and last of all, behold, the mustard pot, which had been sitting on without knowing it, still somehow. The thing got finished at last, without much loss of temper. The afternoon sun was getting low as the rat sculled gently homeward in a dreamy mood, murmuring poetry things over to himself and not paying much attention to Mole. But the mole was very full of lunch and self-satisfaction and pride, and already quite at home in a boat, so he thought, and was getting a bit restless besides. Presently he said, Ratty, please, I want to row now. The rat shook his head with a smile. Not yet, my young friend, he said. Wait till you've had a few lessons. It's not so easy as it looks. The mole was quiet for a minute or two, but he began to feel more and more jealous of Rat sculling so strongly and so easily along, and his pride began to whisper that he could do it every bit as well. He jumped up and seized the scull so suddenly that the rat, who was gazing out over the water and saying more poetry things to himself, was taken by surprise and fell backward off his seat with his legs in the air for the second time, while the triumphant mole took his place and grabbed the sculls with entire confidence. Stop! Stop it, you silly ass! Cried the rat from the bottom of the boat. You can't do it! You'll have us over! The mole flung his sculls back with a flourish and made a great dig at the water. He missed the surface altogether. His legs flew up above his head, and he found himself lying on top of the prostrate rat. Greatly alarmed, he made a grab at the side of the boat, and the next moment, boom, splash. Over went the boat, and he found himself struggling in the river. Oh, my, how cold that water was, and oh, how very wet it was. How it sang in his ears as he went down, down, down. How bright and welcome the sun looked as he rose back to the surface, coughing and spluttering. How black was his despair when he felt himself sinking again. Then a firm paw gripped him by the back of his neck. It was Rat, and he was evidently laughing. The mole could feel him laughing right down his arm and through his paw, and so into his, the mole's, neck. The rat got hold of a scull and shoved it under the mole's arm. Then he did the same by the other side of him, and swimming behind, propelled the helpless animal to shore, hauled him out, and sent him down on the bank, a squashy, pulpy lump of misery. When the rat had rubbed him down a bit and wrung some of the wet out of him, he said, "Now then, old fellow, trot up and down the towing path as hard as you can, till you're warm and dry again, while I dive for the luncheon basket." So the dismal mole, wet without and ashamed within, trotted about till he was fairly dry, while the rat plunged into the water again, recovered the boat, righted her, and made her fast, fetched his floating property to shore by degrees, and finally dived successfully for the luncheon basket and struggled back to land with it. When all was ready for a start once more, the mole, limp and dejected, took his seat in the stern of the boat, and as they set off, said in a low voice, broken with emotion, "Ratty, my generous friend, I am very sorry indeed for my foolish and ungrateful conduct. My heart quite fails me when I think how I might have lost that beautiful luncheon basket. Indeed, I have been a complete ass, and I know it. Will you overlook it this once and forgive me, and let things go on as before?" "Oh, that's all right, bless you," responded the rat cheerily. "What's a little wet to a water rat? I'm more in the water than out of it most days. Don't you think any more about it. And look here. I really think that you had better come and stop with me for a little time. It's very plain and rough, you know, not like Toad's house at all, but you haven't seen that yet. Still, I can make you comfortable, and I'll teach you to row and to swim, and you'll soon be handy on the water as any of us." The mole was so touched by this kind manner of speaking that he could find no voice to answer him, and he had to brush away a tear or two with the back of his paw. But the rat kindly looked in another direction, and presently the mole's spirits revived again, and he was even able to give some straight back talk to a couple of more hens who were sniggering to each other about his bedraggled appearance. When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlour and planted the mole in an armchair in front of it, having fetched down a dressing gown and slippers for him, and told him river stories till supper time. Very thrilling stories they were too, to an earth-dwelling animal like mole, that is. Stories about weirs and sudden floods and leaping pike and steamers that flung hard bottles, at least bottles that were certainly flung, and from steamers and presumably by them, and about herons and how particular they were whom they spoke to, and about adventures down drains and night fishings with otter or excursions far afield with badger. Supper was a most cheerful meal, but very shortly afterwards a terribly sleepy mole had to be escorted upstairs by his considerate host to the best bedroom, where he soon lay his head on the pillow in great peace and contentment, knowing that his new-found friend the river was lapping the sill of his window. This day was only the first of many similar ones for the emancipated mole, each of them longer and fuller of interest as the ripening summer moved onward. He learned to swim and to row, and entered into the joy of running water, and with his ear to the reed stems he caught at intervals something of what the wind went whispering so constantly among them. There you go. So that was the end of chapter 1 of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Tomorrow we'll start chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called The Open Road. There you go. That'll be tomorrow. So yeah, thanks very much for all your comments on the first video last night. It was nice. I had loads of people saying, or just wishing me well, which is always a nice feeling. So thank you. Thank you very much. It started off as my most watched video in the first, I think it was half an hour or something. But it's still David Walliams. Maybe it's because the David Walliams playlist that I did during lockdown is the oldest playlist, so perhaps that's why. But when I get my, I can't remember what it's called, Insights maybe, for YouTube, it still says that's the most watched playlist. There we go. Hey. So yeah, I really like that opening part of Wind in the Willows, like where Mole goes from his earthen home to live in a river home with Ratty, and the way that, not just because of how Kenneth Grahame makes Ratty's friendliness and makes him like an ideal host, doesn't he? But there's a little bit of that takes Mr. S back to being a little Master S when he was a little boy, and going from my home, which wasn't necessarily in a town, it was like kind of quite maybe a farmy place where I lived, but going along the coast to where my grandparents lived, and just it wasn't all like watching TV around my grandparents' house or doing that sort of thing. This was the very early 80s, but it was like just listening to my granddad telling me stuff and stories, and listening to my granddad teaching me stuff, and like just going out with my grandparents and doing their daily chores, just going down, they called it the street, which was just like a row of shops basically, but they'd go down there every day to get their paper, to get their tea time, to get their lunch, and like they'd just see all of their old friends and stuff. Man alive, I loved those days. And they are probably, if someone said, when this all ends for you, Mr. S, gloomy, when this all ends for you, Mr. S, you get to go back to your happiest memories. That's where I'll go, I bet you, and just relive that over and over. I'll see the kids being born as well. Happy memories, of course, watching them grow up. But yeah, going back to that time. Oh, and just that little bit there where Mole is staying around Ratty's house, and he's just like the lovely host looking after him, telling him stories, teaching him stuff. I think that's why I love that bit so much. Maybe there's still a little bit of the Paulie in my head and making me waffle a little bit, do you think? All right, okay. Love you lots, and I'll see you all tomorrow.